Indonesia AirAsia Flight 8501, with 156 passengers on board, was cruising at a high altitude over the Java Sea when the aircraft unexpectedly began to roll sharply to the left. The situation quickly escalated as the aircraft appeared to operate independently, climbing higher while the pilot struggled to regain control. Suddenly, the plane began to lose altitude, descending rapidly towards the Java Sea below. It seemed that the pilots were unable to take any effective measures to save the aircraft. This incident highlights issues related to human error, training inadequacies, and miscommunication. This is the account of Indonesia AirAsia Flight 8501. On December 25, 2014, a passenger flight was scheduled to depart from Surabaya, with Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia, as its destination. The aircraft assigned to this flight was an Airbus A320, which was 6 years old and had logged approximately 23,000 flight hours. During the pushback phase, after both engines had been started, an unexpected message appeared on the ECAM. Consequently, the captain decided to return the aircraft to the parking bay and reported the issue to maintenance. An engineer arrived at the cockpit to assist the pilots in diagnosing the problem. After consulting the troubleshooting manual, the engineer reset the circuit breakers for the flight augmentation computers 1 and 2 and performed a built-in test, which successfully resolved the issue. The flight augmentation computer on an Airbus aircraft is responsible for managing inputs to the rudder trim, and yaw damper, all of which are essential for maintaining the aircraft's stability. The captain and the engineer engaged in a discussion regarding the situation. The engineer was inquired about the possibility of executing the same reset procedure whenever the issue recurred. He indicated that the pilot could reset the system as directed on the ECAM. Subsequently, the aircraft was prepared for departure. During the pushback phase, after the initiation of Engine 2, the message reappeared on the ECAM. The pilots executed the ECAM procedure, however, the issue persisted. The engineer, who had conducted the initial rectification, noticed that the aircraft remained stationary. He took control of the interphone to communicate with the pilots. The captain inquired whether the engineer could reset the system by pulling the FAC circuit breakers. The engineer confirmed that this action could be taken. Nevertheless, after the co-pilot reset the circuit breakers, the problem continued to exist, prompting the engineer to recommend that the pilots return the aircraft to the gate, disembark the passengers, and wait in the terminal, as the rectification process might be time-consuming. The engineer referred to the troubleshooting manual, which suggested replacing Flight Augmentation Computer 2. Upon discovering that no spare was available at the Surabaya maintenance facility, the engineer procured a replacement from another aircraft that was undergoing maintenance. After installing the new FACT double, the engineer requested the pilots to start both engines to confirm functionality following the power interruption. Once both engines were operational, the issue did not reoccur. The captain expressed satisfaction with the rectification and indicated readiness for departure. The aircraft then successfully flew from Surabaya to Kuala Lumpur and returned without incident. The engineer failed to recognize that the issue lay not with Flight Augmentation Computer 2, but rather with the rudder travel limiter, specifically concerning the circuit boards. These boards exhibited soldering cracks that could compromise electrical continuity, potentially leading to malfunctions in the rudder travel limiter unit, RTLU. It is likely that these cracks were caused by thermal cycling due to fluctuations between powered and non-powered states, as well as transitions between ground and flight conditions. This disruption in electrical continuity was the true reason behind the RTLU failure. Despite the engineer's attempts and the replacement of Flight Augmentation Computer 2, the fundamental problem with the rudder travel limiter remained unresolved, creating a risk for potentially catastrophic outcomes. On December 28, 156 passengers boarded Indonesia AirAsia Flight 8501 at Juanda International Airport in Surabaya, Indonesia. The same Airbus A320, which had undergone the replacement of Flight Augmentation Computer 2 just 3 days earlier, was piloted by the same captain, albeit with a different first officer. The captain, 53-year-old Irianto, an Indonesian national, began his aviation career in the Indonesian Air Force at a young age, accumulating a decade of experience flying F-5 and F-16 fighter jets. Following his military service and early retirement, he transitioned to commercial aviation, amassing over 20,000 flying hours. Accompanying him was 46-year-old First Officer Remy Emmanuel Plel, who had more than 2,000 flying hours. In this flight, the first officer took on the role of the pilot monitoring. The pilot and the captain, who served as the monitoring pilot, conducted a thorough review of the weather conditions and flight route prior to departure. Flight 8501 was set to journey from Surabaya, Indonesia, to Singapore's Changi Airport, traversing the Java Sea. This flight typically has a duration of approximately 2.5 hours. The pilots observed the presence of thunderstorms and towering cumulonimbus clouds along the route, with cloud tops reaching altitudes between 24,000 and 44,000 feet. Prevailing westerly winds were recorded at speeds of 15 to 20 knots, while temperatures at cruising altitude varied from 56°C to 62°C. After receiving clearance, Flight 8501 was prepared for takeoff. The aircraft was pushed back from the gate and proceeded to the runway. At 5:35 a.m. local time, the aircraft took off, beginning its ascent. Just 14 minutes post-takeoff, the aircraft reached its cruising altitude of 32,000 feet, designated as flight level 320, and was poised for the journey across the Java Sea. In response to the towering clouds and the external temperature of 62°C, the first officer activated the aircraft's anti-ice system to mitigate the risk of ice formation on the wings and engines, which could compromise performance and safety. Simultaneously, the flight attendant informed passengers to return to their seats and fasten their seat belts due to the adverse weather conditions and the potential for turbulence during the flight. Shortly after, approximately 30 minutes into the flight at the cruising altitude of 32,000 feet, the master caution light illuminated, accompanied by an advisory message on the ECAM. The captain promptly acknowledged this alert. Due to having experienced it several times 3 days earlier, this instance was different as it did not manifest during taxiing but rather during the flight, while cruising at a high altitude over the Java Sea. The first officer proceeded to read and execute the ECAM action, which involved switching both flight augmentation computers off and then back on. Consequently, both rudder travel limiter units resumed normal operation. The rudder travel limiter is an essential safety mechanism in an aircraft that limits the maximum movement of the rudder, a primary control surface located at the tail, which aids in controlling yaw. At lower speeds, the rudder travel limiter permits increased rudder movement to enable sharp turns, while at higher speeds, it restricts rudder deflection to maintain the aircraft's structural integrity and stability. Once the fault was rectified, the crew redirected their focus from the ECAM to the onboard weather radar, where they observed a significant storm developing in the distance. The captain requested a deviation of 15 nautical miles to the left of the flight path to circumvent the adverse weather, which was granted. The aircraft then adjusted its course to a heading of 310. Thunderstorms represent the most considerable threat to aircraft among various weather phenomena, often accompanied by hail, heavy rain, lightning, ice, strong winds, and supercooled water droplets, all of which can potentially harm an aircraft under severe conditions. Pilots strive to avoid thunderstorms whenever possible to ensure flight safety. Shortly thereafter, a second failure occurred in both rudder travel limiter units, indicated by a chime and the illumination of a warning light. The master caution light activated once more, and the same message reappeared on the ECAM. The pilots promptly executed the ECAM procedures again, resulting in both rudder travel limiter units returning to normal operation. They then communicated with air traffic control in Jakarta, notifying them of the flight's deviation to the left from its planned route to circumvent adverse weather conditions. This update was acknowledged by the controller, who monitored the situation on the radar screen. Subsequently, the controller instructed the pilots to report once they had navigated past the weather. Shortly thereafter, the pilots requested permission to ascend to 38,000 feet, to which they were advised to hold their position. Unfortunately, this marked the last radio communication. A single chime sounded, accompanied by another ECAM message, indicating the third failure of both rudder travel limiter units during the flight. Following the ECAM procedures, the pilots took corrective action, and the system returned to normal function. However, 2 minutes later, the master caution light illuminated again, and the same message appeared on the ECAM, marking the fourth occurrence. The captain contemplated alternative actions, as repeating the same procedure for the fourth time had proven ineffective. A memory surfaced. He recalled witnessing the engineer reset the FAC circuit breakers on the ground to resolve this issue. He had even inquired whether he could perform the same reset when the problem recurred. However, they were no longer on the ground, where a maintenance technician could assist. They were now flying high above the Java Sea in the Airbus A320. The chapter on computer resets in the handbook indicates that, as a general principle, the flight crew should limit computer resets to those specified in the accompanying table. Prior to taking any action on other computers, the crew must thoroughly consider and comprehend the potential consequences. Although the captain may believe he has a complete understanding of the implications due to his experience with flight augmentation computer circuit breaker resets, it is important to note that the FAC circuit breakers are not included in the Quick Reference Handbook's table, and their reset consequences during flight are not detailed in Airbus documentation. The crew should have carefully evaluated the risks associated with resetting the circuit breakers and developed an action plan in accordance with the procedures for crew coordination during emergencies or abnormal situations. However, the captain diverges from this established protocol and, merely 54 seconds after the fourth master caution warning is issued, proceeds to reset the circuit breakers, a decision he will soon come to regret. Following this reset, the cockpit is immediately alerted by the fifth master caution warning, along with multiple notifications on the ECAM. The act of resetting the circuit breakers resulted in an electrical interruption, which led to the disengagement of both the autopilot and auto thrust systems, causing the control logic to shift from normal law to alternate law. Consequently, the aircraft lost several computerized protections that are essential for maintaining safe operational limits, and the rudder deflected to the left, resulting in the aircraft rolling to a bank angle of up to 54. The roll rate experienced was twice the standard operational rate, attributed to the numerous ECAM messages that appeared following the autopilot disconnection. The pilots were distracted and did not perceive this roll movement until 9 seconds later, when the first officer took control of the right side stick. His initial reaction was to pull the stick backward and then to the right, achieving maximum deflection. This maneuver reduced the aircraft's roll angle to 9 to the left. The swift rolling motion to the right may have created an overwhelming sensation of rightward roll, which likely disoriented the first officer, leading him to allow the aircraft to bank left once more. The aircraft was unresponsive, and the inputs on the right side stick primarily resulted in a pitch-up attitude, causing the aircraft to climb at a rate of up to 11,000 feet per minute. As the aircraft continued to bank left during the climb, it began to lose speed. Just moments earlier, everything had appeared normal, but Flight 8501 had now transformed into a dire situation. The captain assessed the circumstances and urgently directed the first officer to repeatedly pull down. However, this instruction was ambiguous, as the side stick can be either pushed down or pulled up, making the command potentially confusing. In response to this unclear directive, the first officer continued to pull up, inadvertently triggering the stall warning as the aircraft persisted in its rapid ascent. A stall occurs when the wings of the aircraft can no longer produce sufficient lift. To maintain its flight, lift is the force produced by the airflow over the wings. When this airflow is disrupted, often due to an excessively high angle of attack, the wings lose their capacity to generate lift effectively. This loss leads to a rapid decline in the aircraft's ability to remain airborne. The captain urgently instructed to pull down, while the first officer issued pitch-up commands. Sensing the need for immediate action, the captain reached for his side stick, with the first officer also manipulating his controls. When one pilot operates the side stick, it transmits control signals to the aircraft's computers based on a priority logic system. However, if both pilots move their side sticks simultaneously, whether in the same or opposite directions, and neither takes precedence, the system algebraically combines the signals. During this scenario, the two green side stick priority lights illuminated, accompanied by a dual input voice message activation. Unfortunately, this message was not heard due to the stall warning already being activated. The combined inputs from both side sticks commanded a nose-up pitch, as the first officer nearly pulled back fully while the captain slightly pushed the nose down. This resulted in the angle of attack reaching a maximum of 48, exceeding the flight director's operational envelope, causing the flight directors to disappear. The aircraft ascended to its highest altitude of 38,000 feet and achieved a maximum roll angle of 104 degrees to the left, before it unexpectedly began to lose altitude. Flight 8501 was descending rapidly, plummeting at a rate of up to 20,000 feet per minute towards the Java Sea. The stall warning sounded in the cockpit, yet the pilots were unable to comprehend the situation. The captain instructed the first officer to switch the air data source to Unit 3, which would transfer the data from Air Data Inertial Reference Unit 1. The captain likely believed that an air data error was responsible for the erratic airspeed readings. However, this assumption was far from accurate. The alarmingly low speed displayed was, in fact, the true airspeed. With only a minute remaining to avert catastrophe, it appeared that the pilots were powerless to save the aircraft. Despite their efforts, the first officer continued to pull back on his side stick, a maneuver that hindered the aircraft's recovery from the stall, resulting in a continued descent. The adverse weather conditions exacerbated the crisis, as the pilots lacked a visible horizon to gauge their position in the sky. Both pilots remained committed to salvaging the aircraft until it was too late. At 20 minutes past 6 that morning, the aircraft plunged into the Java Sea, disintegrating upon impact and sinking to the ocean floor, claiming the lives of all 162 individuals on board. Following the confirmation of the aircraft's disappearance, a search operation was promptly initiated. The wreckage was soon located, and among the debris recovered were sections of the empennage, including parts of the rear fuselage, vertical stabilizer, and rudder. Additionally, a section of the fuselage containing the center fuselage and wings was retrieved. The main landing gears, along with several smaller components such as passenger seats, escape slides, and interior panels, were discovered floating and subsequently recovered approximately 30 nautical miles southeast of the primary wreckage site. The official search for bodies concluded in March 2015, having recovered 116 bodies, while 46 remained unaccounted for. The investigation determined that multiple factors contributed to the accident. A failure in a solder joint within both channels A and B of the electronic modules for the rudder travel limiter units led to a loss of electrical continuity. This failure resulted in unresolved repetitive ECAM messages appearing at shorter intervals. Following the fourth fault, the captain reset the FAC circuit breakers, which caused an electrical interruption to the flight augmentation computers. This interruption resulted in the autopilot disengaging and the flight control logic shifting from normal law to alternate law. As a consequence, the rudder deflected to the left, causing the aircraft to roll to an angle of bank of up to 54 degrees. The subsequent actions taken by the flight crew, combined with the aircraft operating under alternate law, hindered their ability to control the aircraft within the standard flight envelope. Ultimately, this situation led to the aircraft entering a prolonged stall condition that exceeded the flight crew's capacity to recover. An angle of attack of 40 was beyond the training and experience of any airline pilot, as they had not been prepared for such a scenario.